The day Nora Bell threw Elias Hart through the window of the painted coyote, the desert was the color of old brass, and the wind carried that dry, singing heat that made a person's temper brittle. Her father had sent her. That mattered. Silas Bell wasn't the kind of man to ask politely once he'd made up his mind. He'd stood by the kitchen table, palms on the scarred boards, and said, "If the man doesn't return your brother's deed, you make him return it. Window him if you have to." Men remember a lesson when it's cut into their hide. Nora had tied her hair back with a strip of blue calico and said, "Yes, sir," because arguing with Silas meant days of drought silence. Besides, she cared about Jake, even if he spent more time inside a saloon than a saddle. Jake had lost the deed to the south pasture in a poker game, so the story went, and the man who'd won it, a widowed cowboy named Elias Hart, hadn't come by to fix the mistake. She found him under the slow-turning fan of the painted coyote's ceiling, sleeves rolled, hat tipped back, listening more than talking. He looked like the kind of man who'd learned to keep his weight off a sore leg, one shoulder a little lower, one eye always checking the room. His boots were clean. He wasn't reckless, he wasn't loud, and when he glanced up at Nora, she saw grief living quiet behind the flint of his gaze. "Elias Hart," she said, stepping through the smoke and the piano's tired tune. "You have something of my family's." He didn't stand, just set his cards down as if they were a delicate thing. "If you mean a deed with Jake Bell's name on it," he said, "then I do. I took it off a man who figured to take more than paper. Planned to give it back come morning, when the whiskey wore off." "That's a pretty story," Nora said. She could feel the eyes on her of the bar girls lined elbow to elbow at the railing, the ranch hands leaning off their stools, the dealer with his white cuffs and his sharpened smile. "But all the pretty stories I've heard end with us thirsty, and the south pasture dry." The dealer smirked. Elias's gaze flicked to him and back to her. He had the steady look of a man who'd carry a bucket until his fingers bled. "Miss Bell," he said, "I aim to ride out to your place at noon. You can have the deed and my apology both." Noon was late, in Nora's mind. Late was why the well had turned to mud and the bins to dust. She set her palm flat on the table, took a breath, and said, "Careful, so the whole room would hear, my father sent me to collect what's ours. He said if you wouldn't listen to sense, I should make you listen." The dealer chuckled. Someone at the bar murmured, "Window him," and laughter rolled low like thunder. Nora's face went hot. Elias tipped his head. Something softened around his mouth. "You figure to window me, Miss Bell?" "I figure," Nora said, grabbing the edge of his chair and pitching her weight, "that a man can see a matter clearer through glass." He didn't fight her. Maybe that's what surprised her most. Leather squealed, table legs scraped, and then Elias Hart went backward through the painted coyote's front window in a sugar-bright shatter. Sunlight spilled in where he'd been. For a breath, everything was glass and shine and stunned silence. Then the room erupted into hoots and applause. Nora's heart hammered like an unbroken colt. She stepped through the batwing doors to find him sitting up in the street, dust cloud around him like a halo, picking a sliver of glass out of his sleeve. He looked up at her. There was no hate in his eyes. Just something that made her feel seen. "You made your point," he said, standing with a wince. He reached into his vest and drew out a folded paper she recognized by the frayed corner. "And I kept mine." He held it across the light. "Give this to your father. Tell him I was planning to bring it myself." Nora took the deed. She didn't apologize, not yet. Pride was a kind of drought, too. He brushed off his hat. "You ever think," he said, looking at the empty frame where the window had been, "that sometimes a window's meant to be open? Let in some air." She didn't answer. She didn't know how. Back at the Bell place, Silas took the paper like a drowning man finding a rope. He didn't thank her. He just said, "Good. Now the water. What about it?" Nora asked. "Barrett Sloan's dammed the creek again. I can't get the sheriff to lift a finger. He calls it a dispute between neighbors. We don't stand to see the summer through if it stays that way." Nora stood on the porch and watched a column of dust rise from the road. For a breath, she thought Sloan had sent men. Then the rider resolved into Elias Hart, leading a dun mare with 2 panes of glass rope behind his saddle and a bundle of lumber lashed tight. "I owe May at the Coyote a window," he said when he reached the gate, lifting his hat to Nora. "Figured I'd pass by and see if you needed anything else set straight." Silas Bell came down the steps like a storm ready to break. "We don't need your kind," he said. "We need water." Elias rested both hands on the saddle horn, patient. "I worked Sloan's spread 2 seasons, he said. He dammed Lost Creek on a Sunday with no permit, made it look like a beaver built it. I quit him over it. Sheriff wouldn't cross him. But there's ways to move men like Sloan." Silas's mouth went thin. "You're a gambler and a widow man," he said. "I want you off my land." Nora felt heat rise in her throat. "Pa," she said, sharper than she meant, "maybe hear him." Silas turned on her, and the air between them tightened. Elias eased his mare back a step. "No offense taken," he said softly. "I'll be at the Coyote if you change your mind." He came anyway, the next day, not up the porch but to the lower pasture where Nora and the younger Bells were digging a trench to coax what little pressure was left from the well. He took off his hat, took up a shovel, and fell in beside them like he belonged, speaking little, sweating plenty. He had a quiet way with her brother Sam, 13 and hating the world. By sundown, the trench lay straight and clean, and Nora felt like the earth itself had exhaled. They sat on the tailgate of the wagon and ate cold corn cakes, the sky bruised purple around the edges. She could feel him beside her the way she could feel the first drop of rain when a storm crossed the county line. "You could have fought me in that saloon," she said finally. "You didn't." "Liza wouldn't have approved," he said. He said the name as if it was a cup he still held, empty but not thrown away. "Your wife, Nora guessed." He nodded. "Got sick last winter. Fever took her while I was out on Sloan's North Ridge. I came home to a cold bed and a note from the neighbor saying he'd done what he could. People brought dishes, said the right words. I haven't slept right since." He glanced at her, a half-smile that hurt to see. "You're the first one to make me feel something other than tired." Nora swallowed. The world shrank to the sound of crickets and her own blood. "I am sorry about your Liza." "Me too," he said. He looked toward the dark line where the creek ran thin. "What's left of me wants to see wrong put right. That's all." She didn't tell him then that she dreamed sometimes of water running over rock, of her mother's cool hand on her forehead, of her father before the worry turned him to iron. She didn't tell him she was tired to the bone of being sent like a bullet. Instead, she said, "Sloan's men rode by this morning. Looked at the gate like they'd already taken it." "They'll try the fence next," Elias said. "Then the cattle. He likes to press without leaving a mark." He was right. 2 days later, when the wind came up mean and loud and the sky turned the sick color that meant a storm in the high country, Sloan's hands made a show of riding past on their way to town, spooking the Bell cattle just enough to push them along the low fence toward the arroyo. Nora was in the yard when Sam came sprinting, breath hitching. "Molly and James are down by the creek. Their there's water all piled up against it like it's angry." She ran. The storm smell of that bitter, coin-taste air rushed at her. The creek, which had been a trickle for months, was now a black rope muscling against the stacked timbers of Sloan's illegal dam. Molly and James huddled on the wrong side of the fence, white-eyed, calling her name. Elias reached them from the other direction, hat gone, face slick. "Don't let them climb that," he shouted over the sound of water throwing itself forward. "Fence'll go." He slid down the scrubby bank like he'd been born to dirt and trouble, scooped James under one arm and boosted him up to Nora. He turned and grabbed Molly next, and for a heartbeat his boots skidded and the whole world seemed to tilt. Nora's hand closed around his wrist, and his heart hammered against her palm like a thing trying to live. Together they hauled Molly over the top. The damn wall groaned, an old, tired creature. Elias looked at it like a blacksmith looks at a metal that doesn't want to shape. "If that goes all at once," he said, breath ragged, "it'll take your lower pasture. We need to bleed it." "What does that even mean?" Nora mounded, hair plastered to her neck, the storm grit in her teeth. He grabbed a length of downed cottonwood limb and rammed it like a lever between two timbers. "Means we make a window," he said grimly. "Let some go now, so the rest holds." They found a rhythm, Nora bracing the pole with her weight, Elias putting his shoulder to it, the both of them grunting in time with the water's push. When the timbers finally shifted and a narrow sluice opened, the creek came through cold and furious, soaking their boots and driving the breath out of them with its ice. But as the minutes passed, the dam steadied, the water lowered, and the pressure eased. Sloan and 3 of his men arrived on the gallop to find Elias half in the creek and Nora standing between him and them with a look that would have shamed a rattler. "What do you think you're doing?" Sloan demanded. He had a butcher's smile and a banker's hat. "Saving your sorry timbers," Elias said, wiping his forehead with the back of his hand. "And the Bell place along with it." "That dam's on my land," Sloan said. "You've no right to touch it." "No permit, no survey," Elias shot back. He pointed with his chin to the saddlebag tied to his horse, hitched up behind Nora. "And a ledger that says you paid off the assessor 2 Aprils ago to look the other way." Sloane's eyes went small. "You calling me a cheat?" "I'm calling you a man with a problem," Elias said. He looked up as the sheriff clattered onto the scene, red-faced and sweating. "Morning, Sheriff. You asked for proof. I brought it." The sheriff took his time, riffling the pages with a slowness that made Nora want to snatch them from his hands. Finally he looked at Sloan. "Barrett, you're going to open that dam proper and you're going to cut the Bell place a fair share, and you're going to do it today." He tipped his hat toward Nora without quite meeting her eyes. "Town's had enough of your kind of neighbor." Sloane's jaw jumped, but the law had decided to be law that day. He yanked his reins, spat in the dirt, and rode off swearing he'd see the sheriff voted out come fall. Elias sank down on the bank and let his feet dangle in the cold water, the tightness in his shoulders loosening like a knot undone. Nora sat beside him because there was nowhere else in the world she wanted to be. He stared into the creek the way a man stares into a fire long after it's gone to ash. "I still haven't told you I'm sorry," she said. "About the window?" He smiled, the real one this time, not the polite, public kind. "It woke me up," he said. "Truth?" That glasser, he nodded toward the empty frame in the saloon only he could see right then. "I've been living behind it since Liza died. Looking out at everything like it wasn't for me." The fall shook something loose. Nora's throat hurt. "I didn't set out to fix you." "Good," he said softly. "I don't need fixing. Just a way forward." There was a dance a week later, Founder's Day. Bunting bleached by 10 summers tied to the courthouse posts, fiddles tuning and sugar cookies piled on paper plates. The new window in the painted Coyote caught sunset like a held breath, throwing bars of gold across the street. Silas Bell stood on the edge of the crowd like a man who'd forgotten how to stand among neighbors. He had shook Elias's hand at the creek, He had muttered something that might have been thanks. He hadn't said more since. But when Elias walked across the hard-packed dirt toward Nora, hat in hand, Silas didn't step between them. He just looked at his daughter and, for the first time in a long while, seemed to see the woman she'd been becoming. "Miss Bell," Elias said, stopping a respectful pace away. The fiddles found their song, and feet began to shuffle dust. "I haven't danced since his jaw worked." He took a breath. "Since before. But I'd like to try again. If you don't mind having a man who's out of practice." Nora reached for his hand. His fingers, calloused and warm, closed around hers like a promise. "I windowed you once," she said, unable not to smile. "Seems only fair you try to keep me on my feet." They moved into the circle. Elias was rusty in the ways that broke a woman's toes, and Nora let him once or twice, and laughed with him when he winced, and felt a looseness in her own bones she hadn't known she was capable of. The town watched them without malice. People who'd only ever seen grief come to stay watched it consider leaving. Later, near midnight, when the stars came out like old friends and the air cooled enough to breathe easy, Silas Bell came to stand beside them. He cleared his throat. He looked at Elias. "My girl's had to be stronger than she ought," he said to the dark. "I sent her to fix what men broke." He took off his hat, turned it in his hands, put it back on. "If you mean to stand with her instead of in her way, I won't stand in yours." Elias's reply was simple. "I mean to." Silas nodded once, as if that was the end of it, and in a way it was. They didn't talk about weddings that night. They didn't set dates or make lists or promise beyond what they could carry. But the next morning, Elias brought over a window frame he'd fashioned from old barn oak, the grain running like rivers across it, and together he and Nora fitted it into the Bell kitchen wall that had never had more than a small square cut for light. The first time the sun poured through, laying a bright rectangle across the floor where there had always been shadow, Silas stood in it and closed his eyes. Some things in Lost Creek stayed hard. The land didn't forgive easy. Water still took work. Sloan didn't stop being Sloan overnight. But when Nora rode the fence line, she didn't do it alone. When Elias woke at 3 in the morning with the old ache in his chest, he could rise, walk to their window, and see the desert laid out quiet and shining, and know there was someone else awake in that house who would sit with him, knees touching, until the cool air made the breath come easy again. Folks said later they'd watched a windowed cowboy and a woman with dust on her boots teach each other how to stand in the light. They said it soft, like a secret you keep for luck. And when the wind rose and rattled the new panes, Nora would catch Elias's eye and grin, and he'd say, almost to himself, "Some windows you break. Some you build." Then he'd take her hand, and the two of them would step forward together, into the day.